The train hissed and wheezed as it pulled into the small, fog-kissed station of Netherfield-on-Tyne. It was a forgotten village nestled deep within the English countryside, where ancient oaks lined narrow lanes and secrets hung heavier than the mist. The clatter of boots and murmured goodbyes filled the platform as passengers disembarked, clutching leather suitcases and trailing hesitant steps. Among them stood a man of unmistakable presence, dapper, compact, and upright as a ruler. His curled mustache was wax of perfection, his hat impeccably tilted. Hercule Poirot had arrived. He did not like the countryside. The quiet unnerved him. It was too vast, too unchecked. Everything was hidden beneath layers of calm, like a murderer behind a smile. But Poirot had not come for pleasure. In his gloved hand, he held a cream-colored envelope embossed with a family crest, a stag encircled in ivy. The letter was from Lady Eugenia Willoughby, matriarch of the Willoughby estate, a family of old money, fading pride, and, if rumors were to be believed, plenty of skeletons rattling behind oak-panel walls. Monsieur Poirot, the letter read, I require your particular expertise. A matter most delicate has disturbed our household. I dare not write more, only that something is terribly wrong. I fear it will end in tragedy if left unresolved. He stepped off the platform and immediately spotted a uniformed chauffeur holding a placard. Poirot, without a word, Poirot approached and nodded politely. Welcome to Netherfield, sir, the chauffeur said with a bow. Lady Willoughby awaits you at Ravenswood Manor. Poirot slid into the back seat of the Bentley, gazing out as the landscape rolled past like a painting. Ravenswood. The very name sounded ominous, like a place where whispers traveled through keyholes and shadows moved when no one watched. The drive took them past ancient hedgerows, stone fences, and fields speckled with sheep. As they neared the estate, the road narrowed, curving through a dense forest until the manor emerged like a specter from the trees, grand but weathered. Its Gothic spires rose against a gray sky, windows glinting coldly in the afternoon light. A butler opened the grand doors as Poirot approached. Welcome, Monsieur Poirot, the man said with a nod. Lady Willoughby is in the drawing room. He was led down a corridor thick with tapestries and oil portraits. Eyes followed him from the walls. Lords and ladies long dead, their expressions unreadable. Poirot's polished shoes echoed on the marble floor. Lady Eugenia Willoughby stood as he entered, tall and severe in a dark green dress. Her silver hair was twisted into a tight chignon. Her eyes, sharp as glass, betrayed a mind unclouded by age. Monsieur Poirot, she greeted, voice clipped. Thank you for coming. You must forgive the abruptness, but I fear delay could cost more than propriety. Poirot inclined his head. Madam, I am at your service. You speak of danger. What form does it take? She gestured for him to sit, then poured tea with trembling hands. It began 3 weeks ago. Strange noises in the night. Locked doors found open, and then the letters. She reached into a lacquered box and handed him a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was jagged, almost frenzied. Guilt cannot be buried beneath roses. It grows in silence and thrives in shadows. Justice sleeps, but not forever. Poirot examined the note, frowning. And this is not the only one. There have been 3, she said. All slipped under doors. No one sees who delivers them. My family insists it's a prank, someone with too much imagination. But I know better. The words feel targeted, personal. Poirot leaned back. And whom do you suspect as a target? Lady Willoughby's face tightened. My late son, Charles. He died last spring in what they called an accident, a hunting mishap. But since these letters began arriving, I've begun to doubt everything. I fear someone believes he was murdered, or worse, that someone in this house knows he was. Poirot did not speak for a moment. His eyes wandered to the portraits on the wall. Stoic ancestors watching the unfolding drama. He sensed something here. A tension under the surface. A whisper of guilt indeed. Madam, he said softly, may I speak with everyone present in the house? Lady Willoughby nodded grimly. Of course. We are currently 7 in number. My daughter Helena and her husband Mark, my nephew Felix and his wife Violet, my youngest son Oliver, and our housekeeper, Mrs. Landon. All are here for the remembrance of Charles's death. Poirot stood, then let the game begin. The morning light pierced through the tall, arched windows of Ravenswood Manor, illuminating specks of dust that danced silently in the air. Hercule Poirot stood at the threshold of the breakfast room, hands clasped behind his back, taking the atmosphere of a house that had grown accustomed to grief and suspicion. A long mahogany table stood at the center, adorned with a lace runner and sterling silver tea service. Around it, the Willoughby family was gathered, each of them a portrait of British aristocratic poise, but each hiding something beneath the surface. Poirot could sense it. He always could. Lady Willoughby, ever the Iron Matron, introduced him. "Everyone, this is Monsieur Hercule Poirot. He has kindly accepted my invitation to assist with a delicate matter." Her announcement landed like a stone dropped in still water. All heads turned. The first to rise was a statuesque woman in her 30s, raven-haired, with a hint of defiance in her eyes. "Helena Willoughby Cross," she said with a crisp nod. "And this is my husband, Mark." Mark Cross was the kind of man who wore his smile like a mask. Charming, athletic, with a jawline better suited for advertisements than emotion. He shook Poirot's hand with a grip that was a little too firm. Next came a tall, wiry man with spectacles that glinted coldly in the morning sun. "Felix Willoughby," he said in a clipped tone. "And my wife, Violet." Violet was a quiet beauty. Pale as porcelain, her expression guarded. Her fingers trembled as she poured herself tea, but her eyes never left Poirot's face. Then came Oliver, the youngest, barely 22, thin and nervous, with a mop of unkempt hair and the sort of twitchy energy that made Poirot instantly curious. "And Mrs. Landon," Lady Willoughby added, gesturing to a stern-looking woman hovering in the doorway. The housekeeper bowed stiffly and vanished without a word. Poirot took his place at the end of the table. "Merci. I am grateful for your cooperation. I understand this is a difficult time, especially with the remembrance for Charles Willoughby approaching." A hush fell over the table. Helena stirred her tea slowly. "We've all tried to move on, Monsieur Poirot. Charles's death was a tragedy, but dredging up again is exactly what we need," Lady Willoughby interrupted, steel in her voice. "If any one of you is withholding the truth, now is the time to come forward." Poirot raised a hand gently. "Madam, perhaps we begin not with accusations, but observations." He turned his gaze to the room. The paintings, the arrangement of breakfast items, the choice of seating, everything spoke volumes. Helena and Mark sat closest to the head of the table, Felix and Violet at the far end. Oliver had positioned himself between them, like a man caught in the crossfire. Poirot addressed the group with calm precision. "Someone in this house has received anonymous letters, threatening, cryptic, and suggestive of a hidden truth. I intend to uncover their origin. But to do so, I must ask uncomfortable questions. You must be willing to remember, to relive." Felix snorted. "Anonymous letters? Sounds like a game." "Charles's death was ruled accidental. He fell from his horse, broke his neck. Tragic, yes, but hardly foul play." Poirot tilted his head. "Is that what you all believe?" Mark cleared his throat. "I was with Charles that day. We'd gone out for a morning ride. His horse reared suddenly. Nothing unusual, just bad luck. And yet," Poirot replied softly, "bad luck does not write threatening letters." Helena's eyes narrowed. "Are you suggesting one of us is involved?" Poirot merely smiled. "I suggest nothing, yet I only follow the truth wherever it leads." Violet's voice broke the tension. Soft, trembling. What do the letters say?" Poirot recited from memory. "Guilt cannot be buried beneath roses. It grows in silence and thrives in shadows." A sharp intake of breath came from Oliver. Everyone turned. "Just a little dramatic, isn't it?" he said, attempting a laugh. But his voice cracked. Poirot noted it with interest. "And you, monsieur, how were you affected by your brother's death?" Oliver looked down at his plate. "Charles was difficult. We didn't always get along." "Can anyone confirm your whereabouts that morning?" Lady Willoughby intervened. "He was at home. I saw him in the library." Poirot stood, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve. "Thank you. I will begin my inquiries individually. I shall speak with each of you in turn. And if any of you have received something unusual, another letter, perhaps I ask you to bring it to me." As the family rose, Poirot paused by a sideboard. A single white rose in a crystal vase had begun to wilt, its petals curling in on themselves. How poetic, he thought. Even in beauty, there is decay. He turned to Lady Willoughby. "I would like to begin with the housekeeper, Madam. Mrs. Landon may know the house better than anyone." Lady Willoughby nodded. "She's been with us for 30 years. "Even better," Poirot said. "The old houses, they talk, but they whisper through those who listen." As he followed the butler down the corridor to the servants' quarters, Poirot's mind was already racing. Something was amiss at Ravenswood. Too many glances avoided, too many silences stretching just a moment too long. Whispers of guilt. Yes, but whose guilt? And what were they truly hiding? The servants' corridor was colder than the rest of the house. Narrower, too, with low ceilings and worn floorboards that creaked underfoot. Hercule Poirot followed the butler silently, absorbing every sound, every flicker of shadow cast by the small oil lamps that lined the walls. These were the veins of Ravenswood Manor, the hidden arteries where the blood of the house truly flowed. The butler stopped before a plain wooden door and knocked twice. "Mrs. Landon, Monsieur Poirot wishes to speak with you." There was a pause, then the sound of a bolt sliding back. The door opened to reveal a modest sitting room. A kettle steamed gently on the stove. Books and crochet work sat neatly arranged on a small table. And there stood Mrs. Landon, her expression a portrait of controlled suspicion. She was in her 60s, with sharp eyes and hair pulled back, so tightly it gave her face a constant look of disapproval. Her posture was perfect, her apron spotless. "Monsieur Poirot," she said with a nod. "Please, come in. I've nothing to hide." Poirot inclined his head. "Madam, I never assume anyone has anything to hide. But in a house filled with whispers, one must know who listens best. And I suspect that person is you." She offered a tight smile and gestured to a chair. "I know this house, yes, and its people. But the Willoughbys are private, even with each other. Especially with each other," Poirot corrected gently. "You have served them long?" 32 years, she replied. "I came here as a maid when I was just 17. Worked my way up." Poirot studied her face. "And in those 32 years, you've seen many things. Heard even more." She did not respond immediately. Instead, she poured him a cup of tea and set it before him. "Tell me about Charles Willoughby," Poirot said after a sip. "What sort of man was he?" Mrs. Landon looked toward the window, as if searching for the right memory. "He was proud, headstrong. He liked to be in control. Too much, perhaps. He didn't take kindly to disagreement." "Did he argue with his siblings?" "With everyone," she said simply. "Especially Oliver. He thought the boy weak. And Felix, well, Charles always saw him as an outsider. Called him a leech behind closed doors. And Mark Cross." Her brow tightened. "They were friends once. But something happened between them. I don't know what, only that after a hunting trip 2 years ago, they barely spoke." Poirot leaned forward. "Do you believe Charles's death was truly an accident?" She hesitated. "I was in the pantry when Lady Eugenia got the news. It was Mark who told her. He said Charles's horse had spooked. But when he described a location, something didn't sit right." "What do you mean?" "The East Clearing," she said, "near the old quarry. But the grooms never take horses out that way. It's uneven, overgrown, too dangerous for riding." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "And yet, that is where the fatal fall occurred." She nodded. "That's what they said." Poirot sipped his tea again, deep in thought. "And these letters, have you seen them?" "Only the one Lady Eugenia showed me." "And you've noticed nothing unusual in the house? No strangers? No missing items?" Mrs. Landon hesitated again, but this time her expression changed. "There was something. About a week ago, I found a set of muddy footprints in the north wing. Faint, but there. No one uses those rooms. They've been shut since the war." Poirot straightened. "Why were they closed?" "After a bombing in 43. Half the wing was damaged. The Willoughbys never restored it fully." "Could someone be hiding there?" She frowned. "It's possible, but I've checked the doors. They're still locked." Poirot stood slowly. Merci, madam. You have been most helpful. As he turned to go, she added softly, There's something else. It may be nothing. Poirot stopped at the door. The night before the first letter arrived, I saw someone in the garden after dark, a figure near the rose arbor. I thought it was Helena at first, but the silhouette was wrong. Smaller, limping slightly. Limping? Poirot echoed. She nodded, just for a second, then they disappeared into the shadows. Poirot gave a slow, satisfied nod. Madam, if all the houses of England had housekeepers like you, the police would be out of business. He left her quarters and returned to the main corridor, pausing to jot notes in his pocket-sized leather notebook. A forbidden riding path, a figure limping in the garden, muddy footprints in an abandoned wing. He smiled to himself. The pieces were moving, but he still did not know who was holding the blade, or who wore the mask of grief while hiding a secret far more sinister. The shadows of Ravenswood were beginning to whisper louder, and Hercule Poirot, master of deduction, was ready to listen. The morning of the memorial service was thick with a solemn gray mist that clung to the windows of Ravenswood Manor like a mournful veil. A slow drizzle tapped against the leaded glass, and from the drawing room, Hercule Poirot watched as the household gathered in the rose garden, black coats and umbrellas forming a quiet procession toward the marble statue erected in Charles Willoughby's memory. It was an imposing piece, far grander than the man it immortalized, Poirot thought. A young, noble figure cast in white stone, mounted on a pedestal engraved with a single word, loyalty. Lady Eugenia stood before it like a sentinel of grief. She placed a fresh white rose at its base and stepped back. Her lips barely moved, but Poirot could read them. My son. The family followed in silence, each one placing a flower, each face composed with the discipline of the upper class. But Poirot, ever the observer, saw the cracks beneath the surface. Mark Cross placed his rose almost too quickly, his eyes darting about the garden, never once landing on the statue itself. Helena stood stiffly, staring at the stone with pursed lips. Not sorrowful, reflective, perhaps. Poirot sensed she was reliving something. Not grief. A choice. Felix's movements were mechanical. He knelt, touched the pedestal briefly, and stood without glancing at anyone. His wife, Violet, was the only one who lingered. She stared up at the statue with wide, glassy eyes, her lower lip trembling as she placed her flower with careful reverence. Then came Oliver, hands buried in his coat pockets, dragging his feet through the wet grass. He fumbled with the rose, then dropped it unceremoniously at the base of the monument before stepping back with a scowl. The service concluded with a brief eulogy from Lady Eugenia, her voice unwavering even as the wind tugged at her veil. Charles was many things, headstrong, passionate, brilliant. His loss is a wound this family continues to bear. Poirot remained behind as the family dispersed. He walked slowly around the statue, taking in every detail of its base. The rose petals left of the monument were beginning to wilt, rain softening them until they became smears of red and white against the marble. He knelt and examined something most had missed. A small blackened smudge near the base, soot perhaps or ash, curiously out of place in the manicured garden. Interesting, he murmured. Beautiful statue, said a voice behind him. Poirot stood to see Violet Willoughby approaching, an umbrella in one hand, the other holding a silk handkerchief. Indeed, Poirot replied. Do you find a fitting tribute? She hesitated. Charles would have hated it. He never wanted to be immortalized. He wasn't humble. You seem emotional today, Madame Willoughby. She smiled thinly. Don't we all have something to feel guilty about when someone dies? Poirot raised an eyebrow. Ah, so you believe guilt is a natural reaction, isn't it? He walked with her back toward the manor. Tell me, madam, how well did you know your brother-in-law? She hesitated again, as well as anyone could. He was intense. He liked control, especially over people. People like you? She didn't answer immediately. I once saw him scream at a maid for putting the wrong books in his study. He didn't like women speaking back to him. I tried to avoid being alone with him. Poirot's expression darkened slightly. Did he ever threaten you? A pause. No, but he didn't need to. With Charles, silence was more terrifying than shouting. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. And what of the others? How do they grieve? Felix bottles everything. He hated Charles, though he'd never admit it. Helena, she's colder now. Detached. Mark drinks more than he used to. And Oliver, he's still lost. Always in Charles's shadow, even now. They reached the terrace steps. Poirot turned to face her. You are very observant, madam. I suppose grief sharpens the senses. Poirot watched her return inside before turning toward the far end of the garden, the rose arbor. Rain had washed away most footprints, but he spotted something faint on the gravel, a heel print, deep and awkwardly angled, as though someone had been limping. He followed it around the side of the arbor until it vanished at the edge of the hedge maze. That same strange smudge of soot or charcoal clung to the wet grass here, a faint trail leading into the foliage. Poirot frowned. Someone had returned here recently. Perhaps the same person Mrs. Landon saw. Perhaps the one who wrote the letters. He turned back to the house, passing beneath the old stone archway that marked the entrance to the rose garden. Carved into the stone were words in Latin, worn by time. Silentium custodit veritatem. Poirot translated aloud. Silence guards the truth. He smiled faintly, but only for a time. Later that evening, he requested to see Lady Eugenia again. They met in the study, a grand room lined with ancient volumes and portraits of ancestors who all seemed to look down in stern judgment. Poirot got straight to the point. Lady Eugenia, I must ask, do you know who commissioned the statue? She tilted her head. Why, I did. As his mother, I thought it fitting. Of course. But the inscription loyalty is curious. What loyalty did Charles most value? She didn't answer for several seconds. Obedience, she finally said. From his siblings, from the staff, from his friends. Poirot tapped his finger to his chin. And what of love? Her face hardened. Love is not what kept his family together, Monsieur Poirot. It was fear. Poirot bowed slightly. Merci, madame. That will be all for now. He left the study feeling the pieces aligning. One more push, and the picture would begin to form. Guilt was a heavy chain, and someone at Ravenswood was dragging it behind them with every step. But who? And would the weight of that guilt finally break the silence? The fire in the Ravenswood library crackled with a sleepy rhythm, casting long shadows across the room. Bookshelves loomed like silent witnesses, their spines warm with time, filled with words that once held meaning and secrets. Hercule Poirot stood at the hearth, warming his hands, though his mind was anything but still. It had been a day of quiet observations, whispers among staff, sidelong glances during meals, and above all, avoidance. Avoidance of Charles Willoughby's name, of the letters, of the word murder. Poirot's thoughts returned to the smudges in the garden, the soot or ash near the statue, mirrored by faint trails near the hedge maze. Why would there be ash in a garden where no fire had burned? As if summoned by thought, Felix Willoughby entered the library, his jacket damp from a walk and his expression tightly wound. Poirot, he said curtly, I thought I'd find you here. This was Charles's favorite room. Odd, considering how little he read. Indeed, Poirot said mildly, turning to face him. He did not enjoy literature, not unless it praised him. Felix walked over to the decanter on the sideboard and poured himself a glass of brandy. Charles was more interested in appearances, statues, portraits, anything that told the world he mattered. Poirot eyed him. And do you think he mattered? Felix hesitated, then shrugged. To some, not to me. There was a rawness to the statement. No flair, just truth exposed. Poirot leaned forward. Tell me, monsieur, where were you on the night your brother died? Felix blinked. What? I am merely asking, as a matter of thoroughness. I was in the West Wing, reading. I took a sleeping tablet around 10. You can ask Violet. She was in bed already. Poirot nodded. The same Violet who weeps at the statue of a man she feared. Felix stiffened. You think Violet had something to do with Charles's death? I think Violet loved a man who saw her pain, and Charles was not that man. Felix lowered his glass slowly. She never said anything. She didn't need to, Poirot said. But you noticed, did you not? How Charles looked at her, how he dismissed her, mocked her, and how it changed Violet over the years. Felix looked into the fire. I should have done something. Poirot's voice was soft. Guilt is not only born from action, monsieur. It also comes from silence. There was a knock at the door, and Mrs. Landon entered. Monsieur Poirot, there's something you should see. Poirot followed her out of the library and through a corridor that led to the east wing, once used for servants, now abandoned. The air grew colder as they descended the narrow staircase toward the wine cellar. Mrs. Landon lit a lantern and handed it to Poirot before stepping back. In there, she said, nodding toward the far end of the cellar. Poirot moved forward, light flickering against the cobweb bottles. In a corner, behind an old rack, he found a pile of scorched paper, recent, damp with rain, but unmistakably burned. He knelt, careful not to disturb the fragments. One piece still had writing visible. I saw what happened that night. Another fragment. If the truth comes out, everything ends. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Someone tried to destroy these letters. Not all of them, Mrs. Landon whispered. One was left on the breakfast table this morning. She handed him a folded sheet of paper. Poirot read it silently. The past doesn't stay buried. The rose garden is only the beginning. Look beneath the ash. Poirot stood slowly. The garden again. Ashes again. He looked at Mrs. Landon. May I ask, did Charles have a habit of disposing of things in the fireplace? Or elsewhere? He used the old garden incinerator. Said it was more final. Poirot nodded. Show me. Outside, the rain had dwindled to a misty drizzle. In the far corner of the estate grounds, behind the greenhouses, stood a rusted iron barrel, blackened and still faintly warm. Poirot lifted the lid. Inside were the remains of letters, old photographs, and something else, a small, charred object that glinted in the lantern light. He pulled it out with tweezers. It was a signet ring, partially melted, the emblem barely visible. Charles's ring, Mrs. Landon whispered. Poirot turned the artifact over in his gloved hands. Or someone wanted us to think it was. They returned to the manor under a sky darkening to twilight. In Poirot's mind, connections sparked and clicked. A secret destroyed by fire. A letter that slipped through. A ring meant to confirm a body long buried. And a message. Look beneath the ash. He entered the drawing room and found Helena alone, pouring herself a sherry. You're quiet today, madam. She turned slowly. A family service has a way of reopening old wounds. Poirot walked to the window and looked out at the garden. Tell me, madam, who most resented Charles Willoughby? Her eyes darkened. That's quite a list. Poirot smiled faintly. Then let's begin crossing names off. One by one. He paused. Did Charles ever speak of blackmail? Helena's face barely twitched, but Poirot saw it. A flicker of fear. No, she said too quickly. Poirot studied her. In my experience, he said softly, blackmail never starts as a threat. It starts as guilt. Someone close knows the truth, and that knowledge festers until silence is no longer enough. Helena said nothing. Her eyes were locked on the fireplace, where the last embers were dying. Poirot knew then. Someone had spoken. Someone had broken the code of silence that bound his family for years. And he would find them. The truth, like ash, did not disappear. It simply waited for the right wind to rise again. The air inside the portrait gallery was cooler than the rest of the house, dry and still, as if the very walls were holding their breath. Hercule Poirot stepped lightly through the long hall, each footfall muffled by the ancient runner stretching beneath his feet. Overhead, chandeliers hung dormant, their crystals motionless, save for the faint shimmer of daylight leaking through the high windows. Portraits of Willoughbys passed stared down in somber rows. Fathers, sons, grandmothers, all painted with the same haughty austerity. But the last in the line, the most recent addition, arrested Poirot's attention entirely. Charles Willoughby, depicted in his late 20s, standing beside the grand fireplace of the Ravenswood Library. The painting was rich in detail, his tailored waistcoat, his watch chain, even the stern tilt of his chin. But what struck Poirot was the background. Above the mantel in the painting was another painting, a portrait within a portrait, a woman seated, unsmiling, with ice-blue eyes. Poirot leaned closer. He had seen that face before. Lady Eugenia. In the real library, that portrait was no longer there. He turned as Violet Willoughby entered the gallery, arms wrapped tightly around herself as if warding off a chill that wasn't entirely physical. "You're drawn to him, too," she said, softly. Even now, in oils and canvas, he manages to command a room. Poirot gestured at the background of the painting. "Tell me, madam, was that portrait of Lady Eugenia once displayed in the library?" Violet nodded slowly. "Yes." Charles insisted on it. He said it reminded him of what he was owed. What he was owed. Respect, power, position, all things he believed he'd inherited by birthright. She looked down, and the approval of the only woman he ever truly wanted to impress. Poirot folded his hands behind his back. "Tell me something, Madame Willoughby. Why was the painting removed?" There was a pause. Then, "It disappeared the night he died." Poirot's eyes flicked back to the painting. "You mean it was stolen? Or burned? Or hidden?" "I don't know. But it was there that evening, and the next morning it was gone." Poirot nodded slowly, curious. As he left the gallery, he found Oliver slouched on a bench in the corridor, headphones dangling around his neck, a sullen expression fixed to his face. "Ah, Monsieur Oliver," Poirot greeted him. "Enjoying the family mausoleum, as it were?" Oliver shrugged. "My ancestors were all control freaks. Nothing new." Poirot sat beside him. "You do not resemble your brother." "No one did. That was the problem." "You admired him?" Oliver scoffed. "He made sure I couldn't. Said I'd never amount to anything. Yet you remain here." Oliver turned to face him. "I don't have anywhere else to go." Poirot watched him for a moment. "Tell me, did you hear anything strange the night Charles died? Any argument? Voices? A crash?" Oliver was silent for a beat too long. "I heard footsteps outside my room, around 1 in the morning. Did you see anyone?" He shook his head. "Just shadows. I stayed in bed. I didn't want to deal with Charles if he was drunk or angry." Poirot tilted his head. "You feared him." Oliver looked away. Everyone feared him. As Poirot returned to his room, he found something slid under the door. Another note. He found the letters. That's why he died. But it wasn't the first time Charles tried to silence the past. Attached was a photograph, black and white, faded with time. It showed Charles standing with a young woman Poirot did not recognize. She was plainly dressed, with a slight smile on her face. They were standing near the old stables, long since converted into storage sheds. On the back of the photo was a single name, Rose. Poirot pressed the photograph to the light. The woman, Rose, had the same eyes as Violet. His thoughts spiraled. He needed to know who this woman was, and more importantly, why she had been erased from the family history. He found Mrs. Landon in the kitchens preparing for tea. "Mrs. Landon," Poirot said with calm urgency. "This photograph. Do you recognize the girl?" Mrs. Landon held it with trembling fingers. "That's Rose. Rose Chambers. She was a scullery maid here when Charles was about 18. Pretty thing. Quiet. What happened to her?" Mrs. Landon's voice lowered. She was dismissed. Quickly, there were rumors. "Of what?" "A pregnancy." Poirot felt the room tilt slightly. "Do you know what became of her?" "No one ever saw her again. But I do remember something." She paused. "One day, Violet returned from the village with a basket of apples and a strange look on her face. She couldn't stop crying." Poirot's brow furrowed. How old was Violet at the time? 10? Maybe 11. And Rose? 17. The weight of that simple math settled over him like a storm cloud. Charles had not just been a tyrant in adulthood. His cruelty had roots. And those roots had tried to flower in the shadows. Poirot walked the hallways of Ravenswood with growing certainty. Beneath the portraits, the polished floors, and the silken curtains, this house was rotting from within. a long-suppressed scandal, a hidden child, a love destroyed, and perhaps, just perhaps, a motive that had festered for years. The painting had vanished. The letters had surfaced. The past was clawing its way to the surface. And Hercule Poirot, keeper of little gray cells, would soon uncover all. The sun had dipped behind the hills, leaving Ravenswood Manor in the embrace of an early dusk. The house creaked with a hush of memory, every floorboard and groaning pipe a relic of something long buried. Hercule Poirot, with a lantern in one hand and purpose in his step, made his way toward the attic. He'd requested the key from Mrs. Landon under the pretense of architectural curiosity. But Poirot's mind was aflame with connections. Portraits gone missing, secret letters burned in haste, a girl named Rose banished without trace, and a photograph too damning to be coincidence. He reached the third floor, where the ceiling sloped low and the wood grew dustier with each step. At the end of the narrow hallway stood the attic door. Iron latch rusted, the air colder, sharper. He unlocked it with care and entered. The space was vast, cluttered with trunks, old furniture draped in moth-eaten sheets, and forgotten relics of Willoughby grandeur. The scent of dry wood and mildew filled the air. He closed the door behind him, the lantern's glow pushing back the shadows just enough. He started his search. Old trunks yielded Victorian dresses, warm medals, dried flowers tucked into pages of crumbling books. But it was a small cedar box beneath a stack of outdated ledgers that caught Poirot's attention. It was bound with faded red ribbon, fragile but untouched. Inside were letters, not the ones burned, but originals, unsent and unopened. The handwriting was unmistakably that of Charles Willoughby. Poirot read the first. Rose, I do not regret what happened between us. You must understand, my father's legacy demands discretion. I will do what I must for the family's sake. The second, your condition complicates things. You are not to return to the manor. I've arranged for a place in the village. Discreet. You will receive payment monthly. The third was unsigned. If you ever come back, I'll deny everything. That child will never bear my name. Poirot's jaw tightened. The words reeked of fear, not guilt. Control, not love. He searched further in the attic. Beneath a broken chair frame, he found a leather-bound album. Inside, photographs unlabeled, out of order. Some had been torn. One had been deliberately scorched. It was the same image from the earlier photograph. Charles and Rose near the stables. But this one had more detail. A third figure lingered in the background. A child, no older than 5, holding Rose's hand. Poirot's heart thudded. A child, born of Rose and Charles. He turned the photo over. Faint pencil marks remained. Elliot, 1912. Poirot did not know anyone named Elliot in the house. Or did he? He flipped open his notebook, recalling the family records. Oliver, Helena, Violet, Felix. But wait, he had dismissed something earlier. A baptism record Violet, kept in a stack of Bibles in the drawing room. He had thumbed through them absent-mindedly days ago. It had listed a child, born of Rose Chambers. Name, Elliot Charles. Mother, Rose Chambers. Father, unknown. The date matched. Poirot exhaled slowly. This was no village orphan. No forgotten servant's child. This was Charles Willoughby's son. Hidden, disowned, and now perhaps returned? He climbed down from the attic as the lantern dimmed. Shadows chased him through the corridors of Ravenswood, and the house suddenly felt less like a monument and more like a mausoleum. In the drawing room, he found Violet standing by the fire. Her eyes looked distant, locked on a fading flame. You look troubled, Monsieur Poirot, she said. I have seen ghosts tonight, Madame Willoughby. She smiled sadly. We all live with them here. He stepped closer. Rose. She was not just a maid. She was the mother of your brother's child. Violet turned her head slowly. You know. Poirot nodded. And you knew long before me. Violet's hands trembled, though she kept them pressed to her sides. I found out when I was older. Rose sent me letters when I went away to school. She never signed them. But I knew. Poirot studied her. And Elliot? Where is he now? I don't know. she whispered. She said she'd taken him to Wales, that he was being raised by a couple who couldn't have children. But she died. Consumption. The letters stopped. And Elliot? I searched. I did. But with no records, no surname, there was nothing. I sometimes wondered if he ever came back. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Madame Willoughby. Has anyone appeared in this house over the past year? Someone unfamiliar, but oddly familiar? Violet hesitated. Well, the gardener, young fellow, came to help during the spring. Quiet, strange accent. He said he was from Pembrokeshire. Poirot's heart quickened. Pembrokeshire. In Wales. And his name? Eli. Just Eli. Poirot nearly dropped the lantern. Eli, short for Elliot. It wasn't just ghosts that haunted Ravenswood. It was blood. The next morning, Poirot requested the gardener's employment files from the estate manager. As expected, the man had left abruptly a few months ago. No forwarding address. No references. But Poirot had what he needed. A photograph taken by the staff during a garden party in early spring. It showed the staff gathered for tea, smiling beneath a flowering arbor. And there at the edge of the frame, half-shadowed and expressionless, stood a young man, dark curls, pale eyes, the echo of Charles Willoughby's jawline. Eli, Elliot Charles. And somewhere in the ashes of the Willoughby secrets, he had returned. Had he come to find his heritage, or had he come for revenge? Poirot returned to his quarters, sat beside the window, and stared into the twilight garden where the statue stood silently. In the tangled history of this family, a new suspect had emerged, not one born of privilege, but of rejection. And the whisper that Charles heard before he died, was it guilt, or was it the voice of a son finally demanding to be seen? The early morning light pierced the curtains of Poirot's room with sharp precision, just like his thoughts. The truth had begun to take shape, not in broad daylight, but in the corners where the Willoughbys hid their shame. Charles Willoughby, heir to power, bearer of the family name, had long buried a scandal beneath silence and bribes. But the past, as Poirot well knew, has a curious habit of resurrecting itself, especially when given flesh and motive. Elliot, the hidden son, the lost name, now possibly a killer. Poirot sat at his writing desk, pen in hand, drafted what he often called a map of motives, a tool he used when cases grew too fogged by emotion or complexity. He began with the dead man at the center, Charles Willoughby. Around him, like orbiting planets, Poirot placed the names of all who had motive to see him gone. Violet Willoughby, protective, burdened by secrets. Close to Rose, perhaps too close. Oliver Willoughby, resentful, ridiculed, overshadowed. Helena Willoughby, widow, recipient of veiled threats. Felix Greaves, historian, inquisitive, possibly blackmailing Charles with the letters. Mrs. Landon, the loyal housekeeper, keeper of keys and secrets. Elliot Charles, the disinherited, the forgotten, the child cast into the wilderness. All had reason, all had opportunity. But only one, Poirot believed, had both the fire of vengeance and the kind of access that Charles never suspected. He returned to the garden, where the statue stood sentinel. There, Violet was walking slowly, as if retracing the steps of her own memory. Madame Willoughby, Poirot greeted softly. You loved Rose. Violet nodded, no longer pretending. She was everything this house was not. Gentle, honest. She used to braid my hair when I was little. After she left, it was like the light went out. Poirot continued. You said she died, but she sent letters? Yes, for a few years. Then silence. I think she was trying to protect me. And Elliot. Poirot studied her face. Did Charles know she was writing to you? Violet shook her head. He would have burned every page. She was already a ghost to him. Poirot exhaled. I believe Charles discovered the truth shortly before his death. What truth? That Elliot had returned. Violet's eyes widened. Eli? Poirot nodded. The gardener you hired. The one who vanished in the spring. Violet covered her mouth. Oh my God! You think he? I think he came here with questions. And when Charles gave him no answers, perhaps not even acknowledgement, The past demanded its due. They walked together in silence for a moment before Poirot turned sharply. "But Violet, there is something more troubling than vengeance. There is protection. Who among this household would have helped Elliot? Shielded him?" Violet stopped. "You think someone here helped him kill Charles? Or at least helped him hide it?" Suddenly, footsteps approached behind them. Helena Willoughby. "I couldn't help overhearing," she said, her voice calm. "And I think it's time I told you something." Poirot gestured for her to speak. "Charles found out about the gardener. He came to me, furious, saying I'd hired scum off the street. When I asked what he meant, he showed me the photograph, the one with Rose and the boy. He said the gardener looked like the child." Poirot's brows rose. "He confronted Elliot?" Helena nodded. "Yes, I heard shouting from the stables that night. Then Charles stormed back inside. He said, 'He's lucky I didn't kill him myself.' And Elliot, gone, disappeared, no trace." Poirot sighed. "Yet Charles died just hours later." Helena's face darkened. "You don't think Elliot left. You think he stayed." "I believe someone helped him stay hidden long enough to get to Charles again. Or perhaps someone else finished what Elliot started." Helena hesitated. "There's one other thing. That night, after Charles went to the stables, he entered the library. I was passing the door when I heard him on the phone. He said, 'If you think I won't drag your little secret into the light, think again. I'll destroy you.'" Poirot's pulse quickened. "Do you know who he was speaking to?" Helena looked between Poirot and Violet. "I think he was threatening Felix Greaves." Poirot's mind raced. Felix, the historian with access to the family archives, the one who stumbled upon the letters, who hinted he might leave soon, perhaps to escape what he knew was coming. Poirot returned inside, heading straight for the guest wing where Felix stayed. But the room was empty. A note lay on the desk. "Monsieur Poirot, I thought you might eventually find your way to me. There are things I cannot outrun. I leave behind the past, and its ghosts for you to deal with. The truth is deeper than any tomb." Poirot stood still. Felix had fled, and with him, perhaps, went the last living link to what truly happened the night Charles died. Yet Poirot was not deterred. The truth was assembling brick by brick. A disinherited son, a murdered father, and somewhere behind layers of shame and secrets, the final piece waited. Not just who did it, but why. Because sometimes it is not guilt that drives a hand, but silence. And Poirot was very close to breaking it. The shadows stretched long across the walls of Ravenswood Manor, as if time itself were holding its breath. Hercule Poirot sat by the flickering fire in the drawing room, his gaze steady, though his mind was racing. The pieces of the puzzle were nearly in place. Felix Greaves had vanished, but Poirot knew that flight, though it suggested guilt, was not always the mark of a criminal. It was often the act of someone cornered, someone whose back was to the wall, someone who had something to hide. The letters, the photographs, the threats, they painted a picture of a family crumbling under its own secrets. But behind it all, there was something far darker, a mystery that transcended mere family drama. Poirot's thoughts turned back to Elliot, the son who was never meant to be, the child Charles Willoughby had abandoned, and whose return had ignited a series of tragic events. But it wasn't just vengeance that had brought Elliot back to Ravenswood. It was something deeper, something more dangerous. Violet had been the first to notice the pattern. Helena had revealed the threat Charles had made to Felix, and the gardener's strange disappearance added another layer to the complex web Poirot had spent days untangling. But there was one final piece, and Poirot knew it lay within the walls of Ravenswood itself. He had suspected it for some time now, but the final confirmation came when he received an unexpected visitor in the dead of night. A quiet knock at his door, followed by the familiar figure of Mrs. Landon, the housekeeper. Her face was pale, her hands trembling as she entered, closing the door behind her. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I have come to confess." Poirot rose to meet her, his expression gentle but expectant. He had known for some time that Mrs. Landon had been hiding something. She was far too involved in the Willoughby family drama, too observant to be a mere bystander. And now, Here she was, ready to reveal what she had kept hidden. "What is it, Mrs. Landon?" Poirot asked, his tone calm, encouraging. "Please tell me." She swallowed hard, her eyes flickering with fear. "It is about Charles. He was blackmailing me." "I," she paused, a choked sob escaping her lips. "I never meant for any of this to happen." Poirot gestured for her to sit. As she did, he could see her hands were shaking. "Go on," he urged gently. Mrs. Landon took a deep breath, her gaze falling to the floor. "When Charles found out about Elliot, when he realized that the boy was still alive, he came to me. He said if I didn't help him, if I didn't keep quiet about Rose and the child, he would ruin me. He would tell everyone about my past, about the things I had done, the things I thought I had left behind." Poirot's mind raced. "You helped him cover up the truth?" "I didn't have a choice," she whispered. "He said that if I told anyone about Elliot or about Rose's child, he would ruin my life. He had too much power, Monsieur Poirot, and I was too afraid." Poirot's gaze softened. He understood fear. He understood what it was to be cornered by one's past. But there was more to this. "And when did you realize that Elliot had returned?" Poirot asked, his voice steady. Mrs. Landon's eyes filled with tears. "When he first showed up as a gardener, I knew it was him. The resemblance was undeniable. But Charles didn't know. He never suspected a thing." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "You saw the connection between them, the child and the gardener. But did you know how far Charles was willing to go to protect his secret?" Mrs. Landon nodded, her lips trembling. "Charles was terrified. He would do anything to keep Elliot from finding out the truth, anything to keep him from taking his rightful place in the family." Poirot's mind raced. And what of Felix Greaves? What role did he play in all this? Mrs. Landon's face twisted in distaste. Felix was always digging. He'd been trying to uncover the family's secrets for years. Charles didn't trust him, and I think Charles was going to confront him about the letters. The ones he kept hidden. The ones that would have exposed everything. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "So you believe that Felix was the one Charles threatened?" Mrs. Landon nodded, wiping her eyes. "Yes, I overheard part of the conversation. He said he would ruin Felix if he didn't stop poking around. Charles was afraid of what Felix might find." Poirot leaned back in his chair, processing the information. The threat against Felix was the final piece that had been missing. It wasn't just Elliot seeking revenge. It was a family desperately trying to protect its secrets. And when those secrets began to unravel, someone had to pay the price. "You said you came to confess," Poirot said softly. "What do you feel guilty about, Mrs. Landon?" Her shoulders slumped as she stared at the floor. "I knew what was happening. I knew Charles was hiding the truth about Elliot, but I didn't stop it. I didn't stop him from blackmailing me or from hurting others. I allowed it all to happen." Poirot's gaze softened further. "Guilt is a powerful force, Mrs. Landon, but it is never too late to do what is right." She nodded slowly, her eyes filled with remorse. "I'm so sorry. I should have done something sooner. I should have stopped him." Poirot sat in silence for a moment, then rose to his feet. "It is never too late, madam. The truth must come to light." Mrs. Landon stood as well, her posture trembling. "What will happen now, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot smiled gently. "Now, we find the one who truly committed the crime, and we ensure that the secrets of Ravenswood are finally laid bare." The storm that had been gathering over Ravenswood Manor finally broke. A surge of wind and rain pounded the estate, a fitting metaphor for the chaos that had unfolded within its walls. Hercule Poirot stood at the center of it all, unmoved by the tempest. The truth was finally within reach, and with it, the resolution of a case that had begun with whispers and would end in a roar of revelation. With Mrs. Landon's confession, Poirot had pieced together the last elements of the puzzle. The blackmail, the threats, the hidden son, all led to one undeniable conclusion. The murder of Charles Willoughby was not the result of a crime of passion, nor an act of sudden fury. It was the outcome of years of deceit, fear, and the desperation to preserve the family's legacy at all costs. Poirot's first stop was to return to the Willoughby Library, where the night had taken a fateful turn. He had spent hours reviewing the letters, the photographs, the old family records. The truth was now a matter of who would admit it first, and why. He had sent for Violet, Helena, and Felix Greaves, each of whom had, in some way, played their part in the tragedy that had unfolded. But one figure still loomed large in Poirot's mind. Elliot, the disinherited son. He had come to Ravenswood with a mission, and while his actions had been driven by vengeance, it was not just his own life at stake. It was the fate of the entire Willoughby family. Violet had been the first to arrive. Her face pale and drawn, the weight of the truth slowly sinking in. She entered the drawing room and took a seat opposite Poirot, her eyes avoiding his gaze. "Tell me, Violet," Poirot began, his voice calm. "Did you know that Ellie was not just a gardener?" Violet's eyes flickered. I suspected, but I never wanted to believe it. I wanted him to be the man he could have been, not the shadow of a past I had long buried. Poirot nodded, his expression sympathetic. And Charles, was he ever going to allow Elliot to take his rightful place in the family? Violet shook her head. No, Charles was too proud, too arrogant to admit that his own blood had been denied. He believed that by silencing Elliot, he could keep the family's name intact, but it was already crumbling. Poirot paused. "You loved Rose, didn't you?" Violet's eyes filled with tears. "Rose was my sister and my best friend. I couldn't understand why she had to go. She was trying to protect me and Elliot from a man who would stop at nothing to keep his secrets hidden." "Charles?" Poirot asked. "Yes," Violet whispered. "He was ruthless. I knew he would do anything to keep the truth buried, to maintain his power." It was then that Helena arrived, her face betraying no emotion. She was always a picture of control, but Poirot could see through her facade. "You knew about the blackmail, didn't you?" Poirot asked. Helena's gaze flickered, but she nodded slowly. "I knew. Charles threatened to destroy me. I had no choice but comply with his wishes. Did you ever consider telling someone about Elliot?" Poirot pressed. Helena sighed deeply. "I wanted to, but Charles was never one to forgive or forget. He would have ruined me and anyone who stood in his way." The door opened once more, and Felix Greaves stepped inside, his posture stiff with tension. He had been silent throughout most of the investigation, but now the weight of Poirot's questions hung heavy in the room. "You were the one who found the letters, weren't you?" Poirot asked, his voice sharp. Felix hesitated, but nodded. "Yes, I discovered them in the family archives. Letters from Rose, from the child. But when I showed them to Charles, he threatened me, told me I had no right to uncover their secrets." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "And what did you do with the letters?" "I kept them hidden. I thought if I held on to them long enough, I might be able to use them as leverage one day. But I never imagined it would come to this." Poirot stood and paced before the fireplace. "All of you, in your way, were complicit in the tragedy that occurred here. Violet, you loved Rose but did nothing to protect her legacy. Helena, you feared Charles so much that you allowed him to destroy the lives of others. Felix, you hid the truth for your own gain, hoping to use it as a bargaining chip. And Mrs. Landon." Poirot turned to face the housekeeper, who had re-entered the room. "You knew of the blackmail. You knew of the lies. Yet you did nothing to stop it." Mrs. Landon's face crumpled. "I was afraid. I couldn't risk losing everything I had worked for. But I was wrong. I should have told you earlier." Poirot nodded. "And now, we must confront the one who was truly responsible for Charles Willoughby's death." There was a heavy silence in the room. Poirot turned his attention to the doorway. "Elliot." The door opened, and there, standing in the doorway, was a figure of Elliot, disheveled, exhausted, but with a look of resolve in his eyes. "I knew you would come for me," he said quietly. Poirot studied him for a long moment. "You sought justice, Elliot, but what you did was not justice. It was vengeance. And in the end, it cost you more than you could ever have imagined." Elliot's shoulders sagged. "I didn't know what else to do. My father rejected me. My mother was gone. The family I wanted to be a part of was shattered, all because of Charles's lies. I couldn't live with it any longer." Poirot took a step forward. "And what of the murder? Did you kill him?" Elliot's eyes burned with a mixture of guilt and pain. "No, I didn't kill him, but I was there. I confronted him in the library, And I told him I would expose the truth. I told him I would reveal everything. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And then what happened? Elliot closed his eyes, a single tear slipping down his cheek. Charles, he laughed. He told me that nothing would change, that I was nothing more than a ghost to him. And then he fell. The gunshot, it came from behind me. Poirot's mind whirled. Behind you? You didn't see the person who shot him? Elliot shook his head. No, but I knew it wasn't me. It wasn't my hand that ended his life. Poirot's gaze shifted to the others in the room. He understood now. The murderer had been among them all along. The one who had orchestrated the cover-up. The one who had sought to protect their own secrets. And that person would soon face the consequences of their actions. Don't forget to subscribe for more gripping mystery stories like Whispers of Guilt. Hit the notification bell so you never miss the next shocking twist in our true crime series. Share your thoughts in the comments. Who do you think was the true mastermind behind the murder?